Hey, welcome to The Numbers Game. I'm Coach T, and in this tutorial, I'll be doing an introduction to truth tables. We'll be taking a look at the truth tables of logical statements, and, or, and not. And we'll also be taking a look at the truth tables corresponding to conditional statements, or if-then statements. Let's get started. In this video, we'll be going over logic statements, conditional statements, and their corresponding truth tables. When solving truth tables, usually statements are assigned variables, but for the purposes of this video, we'll stick with P and Q. Speaking of P and Q, let's start with our first logic statement, P and Q. And is represented by the down-facing caret. And to understand the properties of the and statement, let's take a look at its Venn diagram. Now, if we have two sets, P and Q, the logic statement and is represented by this area here, where the sets P and Q intersect. This is where the logic statement and is true. Anywhere outside of this area, the statement is false. For example, let's say that P is false, or in other words, P is outside of the bounds of our set. This may look like set P and set Q, and let's say that everything that is not P is this part of Q and everything on the outside. The logic statement P and Q is false because it does not exist in the intersection of our two sets. Now, let's take a look at the truth table for the statement P and Q. Now, when P is true and Q is true, then P and Q is true. When P is true and Q is false, then P and Q is false. When P is false and Q is true, then P and Q is false. And lastly, when P is false and Q is false as well, then P and Q is false. Now, we see here that the statement P and Q is only true when P is true and Q is true. Otherwise, this logic statement is false. So this is the truth table for our logic statement P and Q. And now let's move on to our next statement, P or Q. The statement P or Q is represented by this up-facing caret. Now, the Venn diagram representing P or Q looks like the following. We've got our set P and our set Q, and P or Q is represented by this area here. So this is all of P and all of Q. So the statement P or Q is true when it is represented or included in this area. Similarly, P or Q is false when it is not represented in this area, so it'll lie outside of our set. Now, the statement P or Q's truth table is as follows. When P is true and Q is true, then P or Q is true. When P is true and Q is false, then P or Q is true. When P is false and Q is true, then P or Q is true. And then lastly, when both P and Q are false, then P or Q is false. Now, for this logic statement, we observe that the only time that the statement is false is when both P and Q are false. And again, that's represented by this area outside of these two sets. Now, let's move on to the not statement. Let's say that we have set P and set Q. Not P would be anything represented in the Venn diagram that's not P. The truth table for this looks like, we'll just write P and not P. So when P is true, then not P is false. When P is false, then not P is true. So here we see that not P is just whatever the opposite of P was. If P is true, then not P is false. And if P is false, then not P is true. This one's pretty easy. The same goes for Q. When Q is true, then not Q is false. And when Q is false, then not Q is true. Now, let's move on to our last statement. It is a conditional statement. The conditional statement, if P, then Q, is represented by an arrow from P to Q. And its diagram looks a little different. Now, if P is represented by our smaller circle, then Q is represented by our bigger circle. Now, writing out its truth table, we'll get if P is true and Q is true, if P, then Q is true. If P is true and Q is false, if P, then Q is actually false. If P is false and Q is true, if P, then Q is true. And lastly, if both P and Q are false, if P, then Q is true. So this is our if-then conditional statement truth table. So we've gone over the truth tables of the statements P and Q, P or Q, not P, and if P, then Q. If this video was helpful for you guys, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching The Numbers Game.